a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Dennis Wilson. Dennis Carl Wilson was an American musician, singer, and songwriter who co-founded the Beach Boys. He is best remembered as their drummer and as the middle brother of bandmates Brian and Carl Wilson. Dennis was the only true surfer in the Beach Boys, and his personal life exemplified the California myth that the band's early songs often celebrated. He was also known for his brief association with then aspiring songwriter Charles Manson, who was later convicted of several murders. Dennis served mainly on drums and backing vocals for the Beach Boys, and contrary to popular belief, his playing can be heard on many of the group's hits. He was allowed few lead vocals in the 1960s, but his prominence as a singer-songwriter increased into the 1970s. His original songs for the group included Little Bird, Forever, and Slip On Through. Although uncredited, Wilson helped pen You Are So Beautiful, a hits for Joe Cocker in 1974. Wilson's music has been characterized for reflecting his edginess and exhibited little of his happy charm, setting it apart from Brian's music. By all appearances the happy-go-lucky beach boy, Dennis Wilson lived out the proverbial live fast die young motto. His wild side masked an underside that was, by turns, brooding, self-loathing, sensitive, and anxious. Wilson's only solo album, Pacific Ocean Blue, was released to warm reviews, but a moderate commercial reception. Written and recorded over a span of several years, the album peaked on US record charts at number 96 during a 12-week stay. Sessions for a follow-up, Bamboo, disintegrated before his death. In 1988, Wilson was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Beach Boys. He died from drowning at the age of 39 in 1983. Early years. Wilson was born in Inglewood, California, the son of Audrey Neva and Murray Gage Wilson. He spent his family years with his brothers and parents in Hawthorne, California. Dennis' role in the family dynamic, which he himself acknowledged, was that of the black sheep. Out of the three Wilson brothers, he was the most likely to get beaten by their strong-willed father Murray. Possessed with an abundance of physical energy and a combative nature, Dennis often refused to participate in family sing-alongs, and likewise avoided vocalizing on the early recordings that Brian made on a portable tape recorder. However, Dennis would sing with his brothers late at night in their shared bedroom, a song Brian later recalled as our special one we'd sing, titled Come Down, from the Ivory Tower. Brian noted of the late-night brotherly three-part harmonies, we developed a little blend which aided us when we started to get into the Beach Boys stuff. 1960s, career beginnings. Dennis' mother, Audrey, forced Brian to include Dennis in the original lineup of the Beach Boys. Urged by older cousin Mike Love, Dennis had approached Brian to form a group and compose a song about surfing. The Beach Boys formed in August 1961, with Murray taking over as manager, and were immediately successful. Though the Beach Boys developed their image based on the California surfing culture, Dennis was the only actual surfer in the band. In the early years of the Beach Boys, Brian gave him the role of the drummer. Dennis quickly learned the basics of drumming at school lessons and, like the other members, he picked up more on the job. Brian took note of Dennis' limited drumming technique early on and, as the mid-60s approached, often hired session drummers, such as Hal Blaine, to perform on studio recordings. Dennis accepted this situation with equanimity, generally giving high praise to his older brother's work. As Brian's compositions became more mature and complex, though given few important lead vocals on the early Beach Boys recordings, he sang lead on Do You Wanna Dance?, the group's February 1965 hit. Later that year on Beach Boys Party, Dennis sang a rendition of the Beatles' You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. He accompanied himself on guitar. Early in 1963, Dennis teamed with Brian's former collaborator Gary Usher, a neighbor in Hawthorne who became a prolific creative figure in surf music recording and, later, folk. As a duo writing, producing, and performing, and calling themselves the Four Speeds, they released the single, RPM, backed with My Stingray. 1968-69, Manson episode. In 1968, Dennis was driving through Malibu when he noticed two female hitchhikers, Patricia Krenwinkel and Ella Jo Bailey. He picked them up and dropped them off at their destination. Later on, Dennis noticed the same two girls hitchhiking again. This time he took them to his home at 14,400 Sunset Boulevard. Dennis then went to a recording session. When he returned later that night, he was met in his driveway by a stranger, Charles Manson. When Wilson walked into his home, about a dozen people were occupying the premises, most of them female. Dennis became fascinated by Manson and his followers. The Manson family lived with Dennis for a period of time afterwards at his expense, costing Dennis up to $100,000 in money, cars, clothes, food, and penicillin shots for the Manson family's persistent gonorrhea. In late 1968, Dennis reported to journalists, initially impressed by Manson's songwriting talent. Dennis introduced him to a few friends in the music business, including the Byrds producer Terry Melcher, whose home at 10050 Cielo Drive would later be rented by director Roman Polanski and his wife, actress Sharon Tate. 2 years later, Manson family members would murder Tate and several others at this home. Some of Manson's songs would be recorded at Brian's home studio. These sessions for Manson were produced by Brian and Cal, not Dennis. Dennis recorded a Manson song for the Beach Boys, originally titled "Cease to Exist," but reworked as "Never Learn Not to Love," a single B-side. It was credited solely to Dennis. Angered by this, Manson threatened murder. According to Beach Boys collaborator Van Dyke Parks, one day, Charles Manson brought a bullet out and showed it to Dennis, who asked, "What's this?" And Manson replied, "It's a bullet. Every time you look at it, I want you to think how nice it is your kids are still safe." Well, Dennis grabbed Manson by the head and threw him to the ground and began pummeling him until Charlie said, "Ouch." He beat the living shit out of him. "How dare you?" was Dennis' reaction. Charlie Manson was weeping openly in front of a lot of hip people. "I heard about it, but I wasn't there." The point is, though, Dennis Wilson wasn't afraid of anybody. As Dennis became increasingly aware of Manson's volatile nature and growing violent tendencies, he finally made a break from the friendship by simply moving out of the house and leaving Manson there. When Manson subsequently sought further contact, he left a bullet with Dennis' housekeeper to be delivered with a cryptic message, which Dennis perceived as a threat. In August 1969, Manson family members perpetrated the Tate/La Bianca murders. Manson was eventually convicted for murder conspiracy. For the remainder of his life, Dennis would not speak publicly of his involvement with the Manson family, telling prosecutors that he knew nothing of the killings or Manson's motives, as he was frightened of Manson getting out of jail or putting a hit on him. In 1976, he told journalist David Felton, "As long as I live, I'll never talk about that." According to biographer Mark Dillon, some attribute Wilson's subsequent spiral of self-destructive behavior, particularly his drug intake, to these fears and feelings of guilt for ever having introduced this evil wizard into the Hollywood scene. 1960s-70s, artistic growth. Dennis' first major released composition was "Little Bird," the B-side of the "Friends" single, coupled with "Be Still," also a paean to nature and reflecting on his place in the natural world of which his surfing hobby was only a minuscule part. He had further compositions featured on later Beach Boys albums such as 2020, Sunflower, Carl and the Passions, So Tough, Holland, as well as others. Sunflower included the track Forever and 3 other songs written by Dennis. Their inclusion was said to be at the insistence of the label, claiming that Dennis' songs sounded more modern than other rejected Beach Boys tracks. As Brian withdrew more and more from active participation with his group, Dennis stepped up as a major creative force of the Beach Boys. Having learned production techniques from observing his brother, at least 2 of his songs were included on all but one of the 6 albums released in that 5-year period, peaking with 4 songs on each of 2020 and Sunflower. When certain territorial jealousies arose within the band over his growing role, he began to hold back songs for his own projected solo albums. On December 4, 1970, Dennis released his first piece of solo material, a little-known single released only in Europe and the UK under the name Dennis Wilson and Rumbo. The single featured "Sound of Free" on his usual theme of freedom, on the A-side with the romantic "Lady" on the B-side. The song was later covered by American Spring and released as the B-side to their single, "Shine Away." Dennis starred alongside James Taylor and Warren Oates in the critically acclaimed film Two Lane Blacktop as the mechanic. The film depicts the driver and the mechanic driving aimlessly across the United States in their 1955 Chevy, surviving on money earned from street racing. In 1971, Dennis injured his hand badly enough to prevent him from playing drums for some time. Ricky Fatah took over as the group's drummer between 1972 and 1974. During this period, Dennis acted as a co-frontman alongside Mike Love, as well as playing keyboards and singing. The 1973 live album The Beach Boys in Concert features only Dennis on stage among thousands of fans on the album cover. However, none of his songs were included in the lineup. During the 3-year recording hiatus following Holland, Dennis' voice deteriorated markedly. By then his on-stage antics occasionally disrupted the Beach Boys' live shows. In 1974, concurrent with the success of the 60s hits compilation Endless Summer, Dennis returned to his role behind the drums. According to Dennis' biographer, John Stebbins, it was this year that he co-wrote the lyrics and modified part of the melody of "You Are So Beautiful" at a party with Billy Preston. Pacific Ocean Blue. By 1977, Dennis had amassed a stockpile of songs he had written and recorded while factions within the Beach Boys became too stressful for him. He expressed, "If these people want to take this beautiful, happy, spiritual music we've made and all the things we stand for and throw it out the window just because of money, then there is something wrong with the whole thing and I don't want any part of it." He then approached James William Garcio, owner of Caribou Records, who stipulated a structured recording process before signing Dennis to a 2-album contract. According to Garcio, "My discussions with Dennis were along the lines of, you just tell Greg Jacobson what you need, you have the studio and your job is to finish the dream. Finish the vision. Trish Roach, personal assistant, will do the paperwork and Greg's the coordinator. It's your project. You've got to do what Brian used to do. Use anybody you want, it's your decision and you're responsible." Dennis released his debut solo album Pacific Ocean Blue in 1977. The album sold poorly, peaking at number 96 on the US Billboard album chart. Dates were booked for a Dennis Wilson solo tour, but these were ultimately cancelled when his record company withdrew concert support in light of poor sales of the album, and a perception that he was becoming increasingly unreliable. He did occasionally perform his solo material on the 1977 Beach Boys tour. Despite Dennis claiming the album had no substance, Pacific Ocean Blue received positive reviews, later developing status as a cult item. The album remained largely out of print between the 1990s and 2000s. In June 2008, the album was reissued on CD as an expanded edition. It was voted the 2008 Reissue of the Year in both Rolling Stone and Mojo magazines, and made number 16 on the British LP charts and number 8 on both the Billboard Catalog chart and the Billboard Internet Sales chart. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?